From my earliest days of childhood, I was always captivated by the story of the three magi. There's something, especially for a young little boy, about people heading off on an adventure to an unknown place, simply to follow a star, finding some unknown king that has just been born, and presenting strange gifts like gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But we recognize that the story of the journey of the Magi is not just a story that is meant to captivate young little children, but in fact it is a story that is meant to touch the hearts and the lives of each and every person. And the more and more that I've reflected upon the journey of the Magi and this great solemnity of the Epiphany, the more and more I see the journey of the Magi as being a paradigm or a model of how it is that we and all people are called to be able to live our lives. It's interesting that we know, in fact, very little about these three magi or wise men. It is only in the Gospel of St. Matthew that we have just heard proclaimed that we hear mention of the magi. St. Luke in the Gospel that we hear on Christmas does not mention the magi, but instead mentions the visit of the shepherds to the Holy Family on that first Christmas night. But St. Matthew notes these magi from the East. We know that these magi from the East were non-Jews. They were non-believers. They would what we would call today being pagans. And yet something within their hearts and their lives stirred within them for some reason to be able to set out on a journey to seek this newborn king. We are not sure exactly how long the journey was, but they say that it could be anywhere between 400 and 1,000 miles that they would have journeyed. This journey would have taken them anywhere from 4 months to just under 2 years to arrive in Bethlehem. And as they journeyed, we know that they did not have a GPS. They did not have a compass. They did not have a map. All they had was a star shining in the sky. And at times they lost the star. At times they had to backtrack. At times they had to seek direction, as we hear in our gospel, as they enter into Jerusalem and are unsure of what direction to go. But nonetheless, something within these wise men continued to compel them to leave family, to leave friends, to leave homeland, and to search for this newborn king. And after being redirected by Herod and the chief priests, we hear that they finally make their way to Bethlehem. And there, as they arrive at the house where Mary and Joseph were staying with the child Jesus, all of a sudden, something within them changes. And how do we know that something has changed within them? St. Matthew tells us that upon entering the house, they knelt down and they paid homage. In other words, at that very moment that they set their eyes on this small little child, they were able to recognize who he truly was as being the King of the world, the Messiah, the long-awaited one. And kneeling down, they take a posture of worship. They take a posture of praise. They take a posture of adoration, recognizing the very gift that is before them. And then, after worshiping this newborn king, we hear that they open their treasure chests and offer to him the gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. These certainly aren't gifts that you that have gone to baby showers have probably brought to expectant mothers. They seem very strange gifts, and in fact, they are. For they were not only gifts, but they were also symbols and a foreshadowing of who this newborn king would be. The gifts of gold and frankincense we heard about in our first reading tonight from the book of the prophet Isaiah, written some 700 years before the birth of Jesus, where Isaiah foretells that day that the Savior of the world will come, and gifts of gold and frankincense will be offered. And though the prophet Isaiah does not specifically mention the gift of myrrh, we know later on in Isaiah's writings, He speaks about the suffering servant who will come, who will offer his life for the sake of the people. And so these strange gifts that these pagan magi bring of gold, frankincense, and myrrh symbolize and foreshadow what Jesus' ministry and mission would be all about. The gift of gold represents Jesus' kingly office and of how Jesus is going to be King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The frankincense that is offered to him symbolizes the call to worship, the call to praise, the call to adoration, and recognizes Jesus as being the great priest and living out his priestly function. And then the gift of myrrh is that gift that is foreshadowing of how Jesus will give his very life for the sake of the world. For we know that after Jesus' death, it was the women that went to the tomb on that first Easter Sunday morning to anoint him with the gift of myrrh. And so this gift that the wise men give foreshadows the death of Jesus. And so these wise men present these gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, representing the offices and the ministry that Jesus, the Messiah, would have both during his earthly life and now as he continues in his heavenly life. And then St. Matthew tells us, after the wise men had spent some time with the child Jesus and Mary and Joseph, that then they embark to go back home. But as they go back home, they do not go the same way. Not only because they had been warned not to return back to Herod, who was filled with a sense of vengeance and anger, who was threatened by this newborn king, but moreover, they do not go back the same way because they had been changed and transformed by what they had seen and experienced. They were now believers in this newborn king, and they were filled with that sense of joy, that sense of praise, that sense of new life. And therefore they needed to return back a different way because they were different men, now going back to their family, back to their friends, back to their homeland, to share the good news that today is born a Savior. He is Christ the Lord. And so this journey of the Magi long ago reminds us of the journey that each of us are called to take. A journey that is not so much physical, but a journey that is spiritual. That we too, like the Magi, are called to be attentive to the presence of God in our life, who desires to reveal his presence, his will, his love to us. We are called to be attentive to the Magi, to be able to hear that gentle and loving voice. And like the Magi, we are called then to respond to that invitation to follow Christ. We follow him not by the guidance of a star, but we follow him by our lives of faithfulness and fidelity, by our life of prayer and of sacrament, and by our desire to be able to do God's will in our lives. And as we journey and embark on our route of faith, we recognize then that we will then be led to that place where Christ is. And as we are led, then like the Magi of long ago, we too then are called to kneel down and to pay homage to him, to be able to recognize who he truly is as being the Savior of the world, the Messiah, the Prince of Peace, the light of the world. And then like the Magi of long ago, after we have been caught up in our praise and our adoration, then we too are called to open our treasure chests and not to offer gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh, but to be able to offer the very gift of ourselves to him so that we can truly become more and more his children and be able to do his will more and more here on earth and to build up his kingdom day by day. And then having given the very gift of ourselves to him, then, like the Magi, we too are called to go back to others, to go back to our family, to our friends, to our community, but changed and transformed because of him who we encountered and then to be able to share the good news with others so that they might come to know the Lord in their lives. And so tonight, as we celebrate this beautiful feast of the Epiphany, as we recognize how Jesus was made manifest to all people and all nations as the true light of the world, we recognize that, like the Magi, we too are called to follow that light moment by moment, day by day, and to be able to allow ourselves to be changed and transformed by him so that we might be able to be who he truly calls us to be.